Sharon, thank you so much for joining us on the Allsorts Podcast. I am incredibly excited to pick your brain. I feel so honored to have you as a guest. And I think people are going to be really excited to learn more from you and to pick up your brand new book, The Stress Paradox, which I think is so needed right now because so many of us have this really negative connotation of stress. I mean, why wouldn't we? We're all stressed out. We're all overworked. We're all tired. But this idea of stress as a positive force in our health, I can't wait for you to tell people more about it.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure being here. And I hope by the end, people will understand why we said that.
Yeah, people are going to be like, what? What? Did I tune into the wrong podcast? No, we got you. So I would love to start by, people hearing a little bit more about you and, how you sort of came to the role of lifestyle medicine, because as a physician, that's not where you started out.
Yeah, I don't think any physician really starts out in lifestyle medicine, and I hope that changes. I think that it should change. But I've been around medicine for a long time. So I graduated medical school in 1997, finished my residency in 2000. And, certainly back then, there wasn't much of an emphasis on diet, nutrition, exercise, all these pillars that we know are so important now. And I don't think it's changed a whole lot, but I do think we're making inroads. But when I, started my practice, so I had gone to Harvard for medical school. I trained in internal medicine at Harvard's Brigham and Women's Hospital. Fantastic hospital, incredible mentors. I can't say more wonderful things about my training and the opportunity to be there amongst the people that I think are really leading the country in disease treatment and in discovery on how to kind of break ground on different treatments. And when I went into my practice, and I've been at the same practice now for 25 years, I had that skill set and I was very proud of it. I was applying everything I'd learned, and I had my patients by all measures very well controlled. Blood sugar numbers were excellent, cholesterol numbers excellent, blood sugar excellent, but their underlying process was still progressing. And that occurred to me because in primary care, you have the privilege of seeing people over time. It's not just an episodic, emergency room visit. You get to see what happens to people over decades. And they were just developing more diseases that were downstream. So for example, underlying metabolic disease would lead to prediabetes, then full-blown diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, ultimately cancer. And that for me was the turning point. I had a patient who developed metastatic breast cancer, was really her only wish was to see her daughter graduate from college. Her daughter was the first generation to go to college. And in a very feeble state, she was able to do that. But the amount of suffering that she endured and the amount of suffering and struggles I see my patients go through, I had to just ask, what is the goal? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? And it's more than just treat. And I have to say that I have tremendous respect for my colleagues who treat patients and do heroic surgeries. I think it is just a labor of love. I mean, the amount of training and work that goes into it is phenomenal. However, I do think that we need a greater emphasis on not letting people get to that state where they need the services. And for me, it was a turnaround point. And this was over a decade ago. And when I took the skills that I knew from my undergraduate, which was majoring in biophysics and biochemistry, I had this incredible curiosity of how our body works. And I paired that with my passion for not disease, but health, right? Salutogenesis, how do we build health? And pathogenesis, how do we troubleshoot what's going wrong in disease? And that is where the intersection came to lifestyle medicine, which is not just using food as medicine and exercise as medicine, but all of it, your stress management, how well you recover loneliness, your social connections. And further along that path, as I went the most upstream, that's when I came across stress as the most powerful lever for actually regenerating and healing our cells. And there's, of course, so much more to say about that.
Well, and this is such an interesting concept because I think in terms of lifestyle medicine, there is a big emphasis on chronic stress and the ability of chronic stress to harm our health, to increase our risk for chronic disease, to cause inflammation. And so, this idea of stress as a positive thing, maybe you can start by sort of sharing, like, what's the difference between this chronic negative stress that we hear about and this intermittent positive stress, which in your book you talk about being critical for optimal health?
Yeah, and I have to say, Desiree, I was the poster child for telling people how harmful stress was. I would lecture about it. I even did a TED Ed video that's been viewed 8 million times. And the number one feedback that I got from that video was that people were getting stressed watching what stress does to their body. So, there's no question stress harms, but the type of stress in our lives is a type of stress that our bodies simply aren't adapted to handle. It's chronic, continuous stress. Poor relationships, being in a position at work where you just feel stuck, financial hardship, trauma that's, from childhood, etc. These are not the types of stress that our bodies are made to handle. And of course, over time, they lead to adverse effects because they lead to dysregulation in cortisol and other stress hormones, because our stress response is far more complicated. The type of stress that our bodies are adapted are brief, intermittent stressors followed by recovery. And those stressors are called hormetic stressors from the science hormesis, which is a science of good stress. It's from a Greek term. Hormesis is to excite. And they literally activate our body's ability to do housekeeping functions, to repair, to increase our energy. It is incredibly mind blowing what's going on at a cellular level. And these are the types of stressors that actually help us become resistant or more resilient to the chronic stress we can't control. And that's really the paradox, right? Our goal is not to get rid of or eliminate stress or cure it from our lives. It's to really use good stress to build resilience against the harmful stress and to optimize stress in our life.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you started this conversation too with the idea that there are many factors that we don't necessarily have control of that augment our health. Because I think so often in the wellness conversation, we talk about what we can do as individuals, these positive actions we can take. But I also think it's so important to acknowledge, well, this trauma that you're carrying with you, this stress that you can't afford to leave your job, like those things may be there and they have an impact. And that what we do as individuals can support, but we also need to sort of be aware of the whole picture too.
Yeah, what we have from childhood, and I'll say even from in utero, we now know epigenetic changes are happening even before we're born. Over a lifetime, we have a certain amount of passive resilience. It's kind of what has happened to us. And my goal for people is really to embrace this idea of active resilience, because you can choose the stressors and you can literally reconfigure your brain connections. You can reconfigure every part of your body to be more resilient. So you can't remove what's happened in the past, but you can add moving forward in a way that mitigates the harm of what's happened.
Yeah. And I love that, this idea that we can become stronger and better equipped to handle what life throws at us, because I feel like it just keeps throwing more and more at us like every single day. So I want to talk a little bit because you mentioned hormesis and you talk a lot in the book about how these good stressors help like reconfigure how our cells themselves operate. And that is what creates the resilience in our body. So can we talk a little bit about like how does the cellular stress response impact our health?
Yeah, so I'll say that within healthcare and medical research, there's definitely a movement towards a cellular health revolution, because if you go the furthest upstream, our cells are the most fundamental unit in our body. So our cellular health is a micro version of our overall health. Our cells make up our tissues make up our organ systems. And if a cell in your brain is healthy, you can think better. If a cell in your heart is healthy, your heart functions better. If a cell in your muscle is healthy, you have greater endurance. So when you are getting to a level of cellular health, it's really how the mind and body are connected, right? Because those cells are everywhere in your body. We have over 30 trillion of them. So that's really the goal of what we're trying to achieve. And when we're exposed to stress, we've been told over and over that the stress response that we experience is a fight or flight response. That patterned response happens when we're under life-threatening stress, like running out of a burning building. The types of everyday stress that we experience are actually different depending on the stressor. And this is something that, I feel doesn't get communicated enough. So, for example, when you are developing recipes, writing a cookbook, right? That is something that I know is so meaningful to you. Yet there's also stress. I mean, you're doing it under a deadline. You don't know how people will like that recipe. I mean, there's always some stress exposed, from anything that is challenging to you. But in that process, you're also releasing hormones like dopamine, which are, create motivation. If you're doing it for people you love, cooking for your family, you're releasing oxytocin because you're bonding with your family. That process also releases serotonin. These hormones actually counteract and negate the effect of cortisol. So the biochemistry of different stressors are actually very different. And the fascinating part is at the level of our cells, there's a different cellular process that's happening at a different time scale. So the fight or flight is an alarm system, right? Within seconds, we mobilize, we survive. For hours, days, even a lifetime through epigenetic changes, there's another cellular stress resistance and stress response that's happening where our cells are literally, again, creating stress resistance that helps us handle the future stress in a different way. So during the stress, our cells hunker down. They go into a stress resistant mode where they perform more efficiently. They learn to utilize whatever resources we have, our glucose and our fats, really efficiently. They repair, they get rid of all the damaged parts. We have really a junkyard in our cells that are able to do this recycling through autophagy. We, at any given day have 10,000 injuries just to our DNA alone, and we have a DNA repair response. And when we are recovering from the stressor, during recovery, our body creates new pathways, and that is how we remember how we handle the stress. So when you do this in micro amounts, stress, then recover, stress, recover. This is the pattern. This is the blueprint that helps us become our strongest and most capable self.
And this leads into what you call like the 4 R's of good stress, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the 4 R's are?
So the 4 R's are, so we have 7 cellular stress responses, and they lead to 4 R's, which are essentially what the good stress does to us in our cells. The R's are, they help us resist damage, they help us recycle, they help us repair, and they help us recharge our cells. So we resist damage from inflammation and oxidative stress. We recycle damaged parts and old parts. We recharge by creating new mitochondria and improving the efficiency of our existing mitochondria. And we repair protein and DNA.
Okay. And I want to, because you already mentioned cortisol a couple of times, and because we're talking about stress, and because you mentioned this in your book, I wanted to just get, an expert opinion on something we hear about all the time, which is adrenal fatigue. Like, can we talk a little bit? Because I think, like, so many things in nutrition, like omega-3s or probiotics, like, there are phrases and terms we use all the time and that are used towards us, particularly in marketing and online, that we sort of take at face value from whoever says it, but we don't really know what it is. So I would love to sort of dig in a little bit about, like, what is cortisol exactly? And then what's this adrenal fatigue we hear about when it comes to stress?
Yeah, so cortisol is a hormone that we make that is really just telling our body that we need energy. Our energy demand has gone up, and cortisol helps us meet that energy. So our body, doesn't have a moral code. It doesn't say that this hormone is good, this one isn't, etc. It's how our thoughts, our actions, and our beliefs are causing these hormones to be secreted. Okay, so that is really the key. You can have a quick burst of cortisol in your body, such as from a high intensity interval workout. And what happens afterward is that your cortisol level goes down to a lower level than when you started, right? That's why exercise helps us relax.
Yeah.
But that's very different than chronic stress, where the cortisol level is chronically elevated, where the basal or baseline amount is actually high. So we don't need to fear these spikes, right? When we exercise, our blood pressure spikes, our heart rate spikes, but that doesn't make exercise bad for us, right? What we have to look at is the long game. What is it doing to our baseline level of cortisol? And these brief intermittent stressors create a lower baseline, even though they trigger a spike. So if we don't get the spike, for example, in high intensity interval training, if we blunt that spike of cortisol with some supplement that reduces stress, for example, right before we exercise, we blunt the adaptation. We blunt the ability to actually make the muscle, right? You need the stress stimulus to trigger the adaptation, which then helps you handle stress better in the future, right? So we have to be careful about the terminology, like you're saying, because we don't really want to, balance cortisol. Some of the terminology is a little confusing because cortisol is released in a circadian pattern, right? It's highest in the morning, lowest in the evening. So balancing, well, you want it high in the morning, it helps you wake up. You want it low in the evening, right? So what you want to do is maintain the natural rhythm of your body, right? This circadian pattern, this natural way that your body functions optimally. And good stress is really a returning of what is that natural rhythm of our body, which is stress and recovery. So you'd asked about adrenal fatigue, so I want to circle back to that. Yeah, so in medicine, and I think in most fields, there are ideas that are put out, and then there's a lot of subsequent information that says, hey, this theory is no longer accurate. But the idea has already taken hold and spread so far that it's already in people's minds. And that's really the case here with adrenal fatigue. Historically, the concept of stress was started by Hans Selye, or he's credited with this. And about 90 years ago, the medical concept of stress was born when he had done these rat experiments and he had tortured these poor creatures. I mean, exposed them to morphine, formaldehyde, spinal surgery. I mean, just unbelievable stress to these rats. And they all responded in a very patterned way. And he called it general adaptation syndrome, which he said, at first there's an alarm state, then there's a resistant state, and afterwards, when the stress is chronic, there's an exhaustion state. And he theorized that the exhaustion was happening because the adrenals were fatiguing. They were no longer able to make cortisol, and all of these poor rats ultimately died. And general adaptation syndrome, even if you did a Google search today, you'll get 460,000 hits, right? And what we know now is the same hormone, cortisol, when it's in a low amount, mild to moderate, it has beneficial effects. We have different receptors in the brain that bind low doses of cortisol in a way that help us build synapses, the connections between the neurons in our brain, so that we are essentially upgrading our brain to be more creative, better decision making, improving our mood. And that same hormone cortisol, when it's present in excess or chronically, it binds to a different receptor, the glucocorticoid receptor, that actually prunes those connections. So it's not that our adrenals are fatiguing. It's actually quite the opposite. We're making too much cortisol, and that's what's leading to all the harms that are associated with stress.
Yeah, that makes it so clear. And oh my gosh, the amount of time. So we're talking about a theory that originated almost 100 years ago that we've just perpetuated. And I think it's so interesting because, as you've said, if I'm the average person, I'm going to go on Google and I'm going to see hundreds of thousands of hits for this concept and think, oh my gosh, okay, this is a legitimate thing. This is established, when the reality is it's an echo chamber of old information being recirculated. And I think that's so important for us to hear from an evidence-based professional such as yourself, because it just resonates in such a way, because it makes sense, right? Of course, you've got these like little glands that sit like beanies on top of your kidneys, and then they work so hard and then they get tired and they can't do their job anymore. But that's not actually how our body works.
Our bodies are unbelievably resilient.
Yeah.
I mean, we have unbelievable capacity. And I'm just in awe of what our body does 24/7 without us even knowing that it's doing the work that it's doing.
Yeah. Something I love to tell people is that, that our bodies are built to grow and repair daily. Like, we are designed to fix ourselves, to heal. And, I think this concept of good stressors, this idea of building strength, building resilience through the right kind of stress, is such a game changer for folks, because it gives us this positive reframe on these like really foundational lifestyle habits. So I want to go through each one, because you named 5 good stressors in the book. So I'd love to go through each one, starting with, and this one is going to set folks in a tizzy. So we're going to have to make sure that we really get clear on what is a plant toxin, because you are advocating to eat more plant toxins.
Well, yes, I am. So I'll start off by just saying, okay, why do plants make toxins? And the toxins that I'm referring to here are the phytochemicals. And I want to first differentiate that phytochemicals are naturally made by the plant. And I'm in no way saying that the man-made toxins that have entered, soil, food supply, you name it, pesticides, are, this does not apply to the man-made toxins. So we're talking about the natural phytochemical toxins that plants make. And plants make them to protect themselves. So when they're exposed to UV light, to radiation, drought conditions, plants want to survive. And unlike humans, they can't flee. Their only defense is to make phytochemicals. They're natural pesticides. And they even deter us as humans from eating them. And we have, over eons, co-evolved with plants. I mean, we have such a rich history of how we as humans are connected to our environment. And to add a layer to that, the part of the plant that's making the phytochemical is actually the microbiome of the plant.
Mm.
So the soil impacts, the plant microbiome, which impacts the phytochemicals they make, which impacts the effect that the phytochemicals have on us when we eat them. I mean, it's this beautiful ecosystem that, has just been developed over such a long time. So when we consume that toxin or that phytochemical, you know, we as humans could only survive if we could eat a lot of edible foods, right? Starvation was the biggest threat to us throughout our history. So our bodies had to learn to subsist on the biggest variety of plant food that we could get there, our ancestors could get their hands on. Otherwise, again, we would starve. And some of these were going to be poisonous and toxic in an adverse way that could be fatal. And our bodies developed a way to rapidly detoxify these plant toxins. And they also developed a way to become more resistant to them. And in that process of resistance, we activate these cellular stress responses that we're talking about. So when we get exposed to the toxin, our bodies actually ramp up our ability to repair our DNA, to repair the proteins, to improve our mitochondria, to recycle the damaged components. And what's really fascinating is that for about 50 years now, in kind of nutrient research, we've thought that when we eat the plant food, that we're just getting the antioxidants, right? We're eating the colors of the rainbow because we need to consume a variety of antioxidants. But what's really fascinating is that when you measure the amount of some of these phytochemicals in our body, they're in the order of nanomolars. And we actually need micromolar amounts to kind of tit for tat, one for one, negate the damage from like the oxidative damage, the free radicals. So something just doesn't perfectly fit. And what's really fascinating now, seeing the effect of food through the lens of hormesis, is that that rapidly detoxified tiny nanomolar amount is activating our body's own antioxidant defense system. We are ramping up our glutathione, our catalase, like we are actually developing that resistance through our own ability. It's in our DNA. And this is the gift we've inherited from our ancestors. But the key here is that we've got to eat the plant food, right? To activate this incredible ability to become stress resistant. And I'm going to add, for people who may or may not know this, is the same processes we're talking about that we're repairing through our body's natural defenses are the very processes that lead to chronic diseases. So these pathways, the oxidative pathway, inflammation, DNA damage, impaired mitochondria, everything we're talking about, insufficient autophagy, this is what's leading to feeling crummy, the brain fog, the bloating, the digestive problems, and then the diseases, the chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, shortened lifespan, premature mortality. The crux are these same pathways and processes. That is why it's so important for us to be countering them, because we know these diseases are rampant. Yeah. But we're not recognizing that part of the problem is that we are not activating our body's ability because we're not exposing ourselves to these good stressors the way our history, our biology is adapted until 200 years ago when we removed them from our environment.
Yeah, well, and this evolution of the science really speaks to something that I think people might not really have wrapped their heads around yet, which is the first, that when there were infectious diseases, it was about being exposed to something and then our immune system fighting them off. But chronic diseases develop not overnight, but over months and years and decades, because at like our very core sort of cellular level, our bodies are not able to be as resilient. Like, we're seeing this inflammation, we're seeing this change in how our body responds to carbohydrates, which is exactly what our body was designed to do. And this idea of activating this positive stress response, this resilience and adaptation through the food we eat, particularly around phytochemicals, which, because I think the more that we learned about phytochemicals, antioxidants, inflammation, the more folks got really excited about the idea of delivering these big supplements, filled with curcumin. But you spoke to something that I want to highlight before, is that most of this we're getting in very, very small amounts, in part because we're not absorbing them. So when we consume these phytochemicals, it's not that we're getting them into our bodies, into our cells, but that this micro exposure is changing how our cells operate.
That is such a key point, Desiree, because anything that is good can become harmful, right? The dose determines the effect. And you often hear, oh, there's low bioavailability, there's low absorption of X or Y, so let's get it in mega form in a supplement so that we can absorb a higher amount. And the concerning part here is we don't know what happens when you take that chemical, the phytochemical, the vitamin, the mineral out of the context of the food. Because when you look at, for example, there was a study on people who, this was done by Michael Ristow, 39 people, and he had given half of them high dose antioxidants, vitamins A and C and E, but in a mega high dose, and didn't give it to the other half. And he had the groups exercise for a month. And the group that was not on the antioxidant supplement ramped up their antioxidant defenses, improved their insulin sensitivity, which is exactly what you would expect from the stress exposure. The group that was on the high dose antioxidants did not have that increase in their native antioxidant response or in their insulin sensitivity. So the high dose actually blunted the body's natural response, right? So when you're getting things exogenously, you just don't know what it's going to do. And oftentimes, if it's in a very high amount, the body just suppresses what it would naturally want to do. So we have to be very intentional about our use of supplements. I mean, and there are times where it makes sense, right? Like we often need vitamin D. We don't have good dietary sources. I mean, there's certainly cases where it can make sense, but we've got to be intentional and get out of this mentality that more is better.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, because I think as soon as we get into this conversation about phytochemicals, about antioxidants, because for many of us, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure as well, like, well, I have so much going on. Like, I don't know how to cook these vegetables, or like, I don't have really nice quality vegetables close to me. So like, maybe I can just take a supplement. Maybe I can take a curcumin instead of eating turmeric. Maybe I can take vitamin C instead of increasing my fruits and veggies. But we want to have this whole food in order to activate our body's desired response.
Yeah, it's the food matrix. It's how it all comes together. And again, it's been an evolution over 2 million years. Our bodies know what to do with food. They know how to detoxify and get the phytochemical at the dose that we're intended to have it in. Everything else is really a big experiment. And, I just think food first. And there are times when you need to supplement, but take a food first approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And in case the first time we said plant toxins, you're like, did I just log into like a carnivore podcast? No, you did not. The goal here is to eat whole plants, as many as you can. So with that, like if someone was like, okay, I'm very into this. This is incredible. I do know that I need to eat more plants. Like, where do I start? Are there like maybe like 2 or 3 foods that you would recommend? Like, here's a great place to start. Just eat these.
Yeah, so there have been at least 10 phytochemicals that have been studied to have this hormetic benefit. Some of the key ones, so the one that really was original was resveratrol. And resveratrol can activate our sirtuin response, which can improve our mitochondria. So you can find that in grapes and dark chocolate and pistachios. So other foods, sulforaphane in broccoli. So I would highly recommend broccoli, especially in a world where we're, exposed to so many potential toxins that aren't good for us, right? The environment is full of pollutants, microplastics. You want to ramp up your antioxidant defenses. And sulforaphane uses a pathway in our body, this NRF2 pathway, that rapidly and strongly upregulates our antioxidant defenses. So I would say broccoli, some grapes, and if I were to pick a third, I'm gonna say turmeric. Can I pick a spice?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it can get incredibly potent and well studied for its hormetic benefit.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're going to eat more grapes, eat more broccoli, eat more turmeric, which I am all about. And then we should talk about movement as well. So, movement is the second of the good stressors that you mentioned.
Yeah, so movement, again, was part of the fabric of our lives, whether you were young or old, male or female. At some point, you had to run. And our body not only needs just movement, which I think, there's no question there's a benefit from just even standing up from being sedentary all day. But there's a unique benefit when we hit some vigorous intensities of exercise. The more rapid or the stronger the stress stimulus, so the more vigorous the exercise, the stronger the stress response, right? We get this central nervous system activation, and that mobilizes these unique pathways in our body. We release really a slew of exocrines. These are hormones and messengers that communicate to the rest of the body. That's ultimately how exercise, even though our muscles are working, communicates to every part, our brain, to our heart, etc. And it's through this release of exocrines that we get this amazing effect, right? It helps 40 chronic diseases when we exercise. But one of the keys is that exercise is the most potent way to improve our mitochondrial health. And right now in America, about 93% of people have some level of mitochondrial dysfunction or poor metabolic health. Even just being sedentary without a known disease has been shown to have some impairment in mitochondria. I mean, it's really profound. And when we exercise, we create just enough stress by depleting our energy reserves pretty rapidly. And there's an energy sensor at a cellular level called AMPK. That energy sensor triggers this cascade that releases what I'm going to kind of call master controller. So there's this PGC1 alpha, a master controller that tells our body, you've got to make more mitochondria. And the reason mitochondria are so critical is that our energy, and when I say energy, I mean the energy our body takes from converting food into ATP, okay, the cellular energy currency. We need that energy to do every single function in our body, including all the repair mechanisms I'm talking about. If you don't have energy, your body cannot function properly. And in our current world right now, there are so many things that are harming our mitochondria. The ultra processed foods, being sedentary, the loneliness, the chronic stress, aging process alone impairs mitochondria. And the mitochondrial impairment is such a root cause of so much of the mental and physical illnesses that we're seeing that we have got to take a very proactive step. And exercise is so potent. It triggers what we call mitohormesis. It's a special kind of hormesis where you're not just creating new mitochondria, but the ones that are already there that are damaged are being recycled through a process called mitophagy. It's a selective form of autophagy. So you're essentially improving your energy grid, and you are removing the free radicals, right? The bad emissions. So you're creating this clean energy that's flowing in your body. And the mitochondria, of course, do so much more. We're learning that they are the communication hub that communicates with our circadian rhythm. They are the communicators to our gut. They are the communicators to our immune system. And this central role of mitochondria puts them right at the center of our health. So it's really just, you cannot be healthy without putting yourself through this good stress of exercise.
Yeah. And so the idea of the mitochondria being this like energy furnace, but also key communicator in our cells. And again, internet wellness is going to want to be like mitochondrial health, take this pill for mitochondrial health. The pill is exercise. Thank you very much.
You know, everything that is being promoted in a pill form, even if there is 1 or 2 studies, we are talking about such a low level of difference relative to having such an integral part of our physiology. I mean, most of our DNA senses exercise and turns on different gene expression. There is no pill that could possibly take the place of that.
Yeah. And in terms of, again, getting into that sweet spot of not enough, but also not too much, like where does that lie from the hormesis sort of framework?
Yeah. So for hormesis, so I'll say that we know, as you've pointed out, too much stress harms, but interestingly, not enough. This concept of sus stress, inadequate stress, is just as harmful as too much. And what we're really striving for is this Goldilocks zone that we also call a hormetic zone. And you know you're there when you've pushed just outside your comfort zone, but you don't feel overwhelmed. And you do it for a brief while and you follow it with strategic recovery. And the recovery part's huge, right? It's the yin and yang of growing from stress, right? If you just do the stress without the recovery, you're stacking stress, you're creating chronic stress. So there is that sweet spot, but I think the key here is just pushing outside your comfort zone and trusting that your body was made to do hard things.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love that it sort of sets this up because I still think in our very all or nothing, very body size and aesthetics driven sort of wellness mindset, this idea of taking the long view of I want to help my body at a cellular level. This isn't about tomorrow. This is about a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. Therefore, I can be patient enough. If I don't do any exercise, committing to 10 minutes every single day is that little boost. And when that feels good, okay, now what can I do? Maybe it's 15 minutes a day. This idea of we can just slow down and we want to find that edge and just press against that edge, as opposed to all of a sudden I'm doing 75 hard. I was sedentary before. I work out, 2 45-minute workouts a day. Like this is how we sort of like run in our society. It's like nothing and then way too much and then nothing again.
Yeah. And it's exactly as you just said. I mean, I think when you do too much too fast, you are entering that realm of it's just too much stress. Sometimes people refer to hormesis as what doesn't kill you, make you stronger. And that's actually not accurate at all. Hormesis shouldn't kill you, right? We're talking about ordinary, everyday micro stress. Okay. So with a little small m or stress with a small s.
Yeah.
Because that is the key. I mean, that is how our body's programmed. So 100%, I mean, wherever you are, and this is why I say it's whatever's uncomfortable to you. So if we're talking about high intensity interval training, for one person, that's walking fast to their mailbox. For another person who's, very well trained, it could be, doing an ultra sprint. I mean, it's what is hard for you, right? And that's going to change over time. And that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to change day to day for the same person, depending on your recovery.
Yeah. And the idea that you just keep pushing a little bit more and a little bit more, because it's not resting on your laurels either. Like once you get to a certain point and you just like, oh, this is what I do for the rest of my life. It is just that's like continuous improvement, continuous pressure.
Yeah. And it's okay to take a step backwards. I mean, we can't always just be going in one direction. But the whole idea here is bioplasticity. And it's essentially use it or lose it.
Yeah.
If you challenge any part of the body, it will adapt. So you challenge your brain gets stronger. You challenge your muscles with weights, your muscles get stronger. You challenge your gut, your immune system gets stronger, right? But when you don't, the opposite happens, right? And I think that, sometimes we are in a state where, we just can't push, right? We need the recovery and we should honor our bodies. But I think that we can then get back into that building mode and realizing that we have agency, we are in control. And when we feel that we're ready, that we can actively just shape shift our body towards health.
Which, brings me to the next good stressor, which is heat stress. And as someone who might like a little cold dip, and I just like it because it feels good, but you say that heat stress, there is evidence to support that it has a good stressor effect on the body. So, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So stress, when you think of it more broadly, is anything that challenges the body. Okay. In a technical sense, it could be physical, it could be mental, and it throws our body out of a natural balance that we call homeostasis. In the case of temperature, if you're exposed to high heat, like sauna, for example, or a hot bath, your body's core temperature is going up, and your body is going to kick in these homeostatic feedback mechanisms to bring your temperature back to our baseline, this kind of 98 degree baseline, right? In that process, we activate the stress responses that we're talking about. So we activate heat shock proteins, for example, which are one of those cellular stress responses that repair our protein. We activate really all these pathways that make our DNA healthier, etc. What's really fascinating about the exercise, it actually mimics the effect of exercise. I'm sorry, about heat, is it mimics the effect of exercise, right? It raises your heart rate and blood pressure like moderate intensity exercise. I mean, it's just mind blowing, right? And that creates a sheer stress on your blood vessels because it's taking them in a direction from the heart towards the periphery where you can evaporate the blood. And that sheer stress causes the lining, this endothelial lining of our blood vessels, to release nitric oxide, which makes our blood vessels dilate. It also helps them with antiplatelet properties. It reduces inflammation. I mean, this is back to root cause. How do we prevent heart disease? You make the endothelial cells healthier in the lining of your blood vessels, and you are not going to be prone to having the cholesterol buildup, right? So amazingly, heat can be hugely important for cardiovascular disease mortality. And in a long-term study, these are done in Finland where saunas are everywhere, right? There's the Kyopio ischemic heart disease study where they followed people for over 2 decades. And those who use sauna 4 to 7 times a week compared to people who used it once a week had a 50% lower mortality, right? Wow. Amazingly profound. And it was a very well done study that controlled for other factors that are typical confounders.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, Scandinavians, I always feel like we look at the Scandinavians, they do a lot of like lifestyle things very well between the coffee and the sauna and the cold plunges. But is there any, because heat is a form of stress on the body, like, is there anyone who should be wary of, taking that hot bath or going into the sauna, for example?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because with all these good stressors, you really have to, individualize them and see which ones are right for you. As we're talking, because sauna can raise your heart rate and blood pressure, people who have severe cardiovascular disease definitely should check with their doctor. I mean, some of this is not for everyone. Same with extremes of cold, with all these stressors. I think you kind of have to see where you're at. But I'll tell you what's really fascinating and cool, Desiree. You can take any of these stressors and the pathways that they activate, these cellular stress responses, overlap and they're synergistic. And they lead to a process called cross adaptation, meaning that you can take a physical stressor to build your mental resilience. You can use a mental challenge to build your physical body. So if you can't expose yourself to sauna because you have a contraindication, you can start with plant food. You can start with a good psychological stress. You can start anywhere, build your resilience, and then you may be able to take on the stressor that you weren't able to in the beginning.
That's amazing. There's so much I want to say there. One, I want to share, it's so interesting for me because as someone who has always hated cold, always loved hot baths, always hated cold. In 2020, I picked up my COVID habit, which was a friend of mine who had just read this book called Wintering. It's like, you know what, we need to do something. Let's do something. Let's do this. Will you cold plunge with me? And I was like, that sounds like a ridiculous idea. Yeah, I'm good. Let's do it.
That's awesome.
And doing it did something for me that's exactly what you just described, because something that I never thought that I could do, tolerating the physical discomfort of what in Canada in the middle of winter is extremely cold water. I did actually feel more resilient, but physically, sure, but mentally, both. I just felt like, wow, I didn't think that I could do this. And look, I can do this. Like, what else can I do that I didn't think I was capable of before? Like, it became something for me that was pretty profound. People are like, I don't know why you do that silly thing, but it's like, it feels good. And I feel proud of myself that I was able to resist this and actually learn to enjoy it. So that's so interesting that you say that there's this cross adaptation.
Yeah, and the whole cascade, because I will say the same in my life. For me, like, just even writing a book, right? You're challenging yourself. And, when I first started, I was, first it was daunting, right? Because I have a full-time practice. I have, research responsibilities, administrative responsibilities, a family, 3 children. Like, you think, how am I going to do this? And yet, as you realize why you wanted to do it, right? That clarity of how it aligns with what's meaningful. There's such a cascade that's transformative in how it changes your biology, how it changes your ability of how, what you think you are capable of doing. And that's what I wish for everyone, because I think we all have limitless possibility. And I'm advocating for good stress in the service of reaching your highest potential.
Yeah. And, when you speak about writing the book, that really sort of aligns with another of this good stressors, which is the psychological challenge. So when we live in an always on environment where there is a lot of like the not good kind of stress, like where is that sweet spot between that kind of stress and the good psychological challenge?
Yeah. So I think that, like you said, I mean, there's so much chronic stress. And I think a lot of what's out there for us to manage that chronic stress is extremely valuable, right? So we do need to curb that kind of unrelenting, unavoidable, and oftentimes unpredictable stress in our life, right? So tools like meditation, like mindfulness, hugely important. But it's not always right for every person. Some people, it's just they can't get in that frame of mind where meditation is quite the tool that's optimal for them. And what I'm hoping to introduce is a different set of tools where instead of working so much on trying to, curb, fight, reduce the stress, that you shift focus to how you can build this good stress that releases these chemicals like we were talking about, the dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin. It's really stress 2.0, right? It's a different way where the idea isn't always that we have to get rid of stress, but it's that we want to optimize it. and that we can use the good stress to become resilient against the chronic stressors that we cannot control. And so it's really just broadening our focus, right? Because believe me, like there are times I wish it were easier, right? We all wish it were easier, but it's shifting the focus to working on becoming stronger.
Yeah, I love that. And then the final of this stressor, and of course, there is so much more about this in your book, The Stress Paradox. We're just giving you like a little sampler platter, a little taste of everything that you'll find. But the last one is interesting because it's food scarcity. Do you want to talk about what this is?
Yeah, so food scarcity is really modern day popularized as intermittent fasting, but it's going for periods with less energy, less nutrients incoming. And I'm going to say that there's so many ways to fast, but what I'm advocating for is trying to go a little bit more than 12 hours without eating and trying to do it in a circadian pattern where you're doing most of your calories earlier in the day. So, why that? Our bodies have this, like we said, natural rhythm, right, of stress recovery. When we go more than 12 hours, we get our body into a stress resistant state that activates these healing properties. So we do start, doing all the things we've already talked about. And when we eat the recovery phase, we grow healthier cells. When we're eating round the clock, so the average person in this country is eating or consuming calories, they could be liquid as well, but over 15 hours, we don't switch into repair mode. We're constantly in a growth mode. It throws our body out of balance, right? We're getting the damage during the day. We're not cleaning up that damage, right? And it's like if you worked in a coffee shop, right? In the morning, you're getting ready for all the customers, you're making the coffee, you're going fast pace. By nighttime, your body wants to start to, vacuum or mop and put up the chairs so it can start to do its repair to get ready for the next day. We are not allowing our bodies to do that. So if you go into the next day and you never mopped and you didn't clean the bathrooms and you didn't stock all the coffee, well, you're going to enter the next day with your store just in complete disarray and unprepared. And we're doing this day after day after day, yet expecting our bodies to function well. So simply going a little more than 12 hours, and the front loading calories is purely because our circadian biology, the natural rhythm of our body, metabolizes food best earlier in the day. Our insulin levels are higher. They go down later in the day. Melatonin opposes the action of insulin. Same calorie eaten in the nighttime causes more of a blood sugar spike than eaten earlier in the day. Our bodies just get thrown out of their rhythm, and we don't get into the repair processes as efficiently because we're turning on the lights when the body wants to be turning them off.
Yeah. So, and what I'm hearing too is that this is a far gentler concept than I think a lot of the very sort of like wellness bro, like grin and bear it, eat almost nothing and fast most of the day. This is not that. This could be as simple as trying to get your eating window from like 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., for example. So, this is not like really extreme stuff. But it is just sort of like being more mindful that we're not always in that fed state and allowing some time overnight for our body to get into that repair zone. Um, I want to ask you a couple of questions. So, the first is like in my practice, when we're asked about intermittent fasting, one of the things that we say is that it's not going to be right for anyone who currently is dealing with some disordered mindset around eating. This is really not okay if this is going to trigger you into more of a restrictive mindset. But are there any other people this might not be right for? Like, what about someone who is thinking about fertility, for example? Do we have to be mindful of a shorter eating window?
Yeah, again, so glad you brought that up. So, again, what I'm advocating really is normal eating.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do push the envelope with longer durations of fast, beside disordered eating, women are more sensitive to energy deficits. When our bodies sense that there's a drop in nutrients, it can affect our hormone levels. And some of that, if you think about it, makes sense, right? If we were in an environment where there's food shortage and our ancestors were facing starvation, that would not be the time that you would want to conceive and bring a child into the world, right? So the hormone dysregulation can lead to infertility. I think women who are premenopausal do need to be mindful that that can make a difference. It may be better tolerated in postmenopausal women, but definitely a consideration. I think that probably that's probably the biggest gender difference or the biggest consideration. But some of it is, what's your disease state? What are the goals you're trying to achieve? I mean, anytime you do any health intervention, right? Like, are you doing the fasting because you want to improve your metabolic health? Well, probably just doing a little bit more than 12 hours will help restore some insulin sensitivity. Are you doing it for longevity benefits? Okay, if you want to get to that deeper level of autophagy, probably it takes 48 to 72 hours. There's so much we don't know. And truly, there's just so much that's not studied. We don't have studies in the very older population. If you're an adolescent, we really don't have studies in younger age groups. I wouldn't encourage it for people who are under 18 years old. We just don't have enough data. And most of the studies are on men. So, again, another gaping hole.
Yeah. Well, and, so for people who are interested in this, I love that you said, normal eating. And I think it's really easy to sort of, go down this path of this extreme concept and this extreme concept and forget that only very recently in our human history have we had such an abundance of food, and we are always eating. So, like even our grandparents, they had some breakfast, they had some lunch, they had some dinner. They probably had their dinner a lot earlier than 9 p.m. And like that was it. Like that was just how folks ate until we had all of this yummy, very available food that we could just like eat as from the minute we wake up until like the minute we go to bed. So I feel like what you're advocating for is just let's pump the brakes a little bit and give our body the time it needs to just do that like rest and repair work overnight.
Yeah, I mean, from a body's perspective, the way we live life now is the radical part, not this kind of circadian fasting. That's what's normal for our bodies. And like you said, it's just the radical lifestyle changes in the last 2 centuries that, I mean, they're wreaking havoc on our health, and if I were to design a clinical trial and say, look, I'm going to put one group on a 15-hour a day diet, they can eat round the clock and they can eat whatever they want. And we started seeing higher rates of disease and premature mortality. There's no ethical board that would allow me to continue the study, but we're doing that on a mass level in our society.
Yeah. And that's such an important clarification. This is not about not eating when you're hungry. You have to honor your body. You have to nourish your body. We have to have enough hours in the day to get all of these incredible plant foods in, but also that we were not designed for the kind of food abundance that we have in our current society.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. That's in terms of, like next steps. One of the things that I love about this, particularly because you spoke about that cross adaptation, the idea that like we can just begin today with one thing, whatever we feel that we have the capacity to start with. It's not about waiting. It's not about putting it off. It's like we can start with one thing today, whether it is that movement or the heat stress or eating those plant toxins. We can really build this in a way that's meaningful and sustainable in our lifestyle.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Just start, kind of play health on the offense rather than the defense. And I think it's those slow steps that really translate to the big change.
Yeah, I love that. This might be the perfect spot to transition into our rapid fire questions, which are just 5 little
fun.
getting to know you softballs. So the first one is, what's your go-to easy dinner when you're feeling tired and not much for cooking?
Curry lentils.
Curry lentils, amazing.
Yeah, love it.
Next, the best thing you've watched or read recently?
Ooh. So I'm a science nerd, a lot of nonfiction.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Outlive by Peter Attia.
Okay. All right. I haven't read that one yet. I've resisted reading it, but if you say it's worthwhile, then I'm going to pick it up for sure.
Plan a lot of time.
Okay.
It's there's a lot in there.
Okay. Okay. Cold stress or heat stress? You can only choose one.
Oh, heat stress, hands down.
Are you the hot bath or the sauna type person?
I'm a hot bath person.
Amazing.
I'm a DIY, keep it low budget, everyday person.
I am very, very much a bath person. It became when my kids were younger, so they went to bed early, that was my transition time. It became my automatic. Kids went to bed, I took a bath, and I just felt like I left the first part of my day behind me. And now it was like my time to rest. I love a bath.
Yeah, same. And it helps you sleep better too.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Yeah, I could never give it up. Oh my gosh. Okay. You have 20 minutes all to yourself. You are not allowed to be productive at home or at work. What do you do?
Outside in nature, walking or running.
I love it. Yeah. Nature is definitely, I spent 7 hours in my garden on Saturday, and I was so tired, but also so deeply happy from 7 hours of just being in the moment. It was so good.
Yeah, that connection to the universe. I mean, the awe that I have when I look at the sky and the trees and hear the birds is just such incredible awe of our environment and this incredible beauty. And I think that just resets.
Yeah, I love that. Something I've been asking a lot of people lately is something you are moving towards in 2025, whether it's like a word or a feeling or a way of being, but something you're moving towards this year.
My favorite word is integrity. And I think it's personal integrity. It's making sure everything I do is aligning with what I believe. And I think we spend a lot of life not doing that, right? We have a social self that's very different from our inner self.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of social obligations, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just pivoting, I think, at this point in my life to honoring what matters to me, and restoring that kind of personal integrity between my beliefs and how I choose to spend my energy.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's good advice for all of us, myself included. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible knowledge with us. I know that people are going to be very, very interested in picking up your book because it goes so deep. I think sometimes we know what it means to take care of ourselves, but we need these constant nudges, and the science that you share about going so deep on a cellular level, like how these positive actions help us create stronger, more resilient bodies, I just think is going to be really motivating for people.
Well, thank you. I sure hope so. And I hope that it energizes people to take care of themselves, because at the end of the day, you've got to take ownership. And I hope that this gives people the tools.
Yeah, it absolutely will.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.